Good morning, everybody, to the slightly delayed Planning and Placemaking Committee meeting of the 10th of August 2022. I'm Councillor Ian Massey. I'm the convener of the Planning and Placemaking Committee. And can I take the opportunity to introduce the top table? We've got Councillor Grant Stewart, the Vice Convener, Mr Christian Smith, the Development Manager and Building Standards Service Manager, Mr Paul Williamson, Team Leader, Mr Sean Panton, Team Leader, Mr Jeff Fogg, Solicitor, and for our very first Planning and Placemaking Committee, Miss Jessica Guild, Committee Officer. Are there any apologies or been submitted to? No apologies. No apologies have been submitted. And I must remind everybody that as this is a hybrid meeting, members joining virtually are reminded that if you leave the meeting during consideration of any application, you are unable to participate or vote on that item when you return to the meeting. This also means that if member loses their internet connection during the consideration of an item, they should not vote on that item. Please advise the clerk via the meeting chat that you are leaving the meeting, or if you have lost your connection and are therefore unable to vote on the item. Whilst we are operating a hybrid meeting for the proceedings today, can I remind councillors and officers to use the chat box to attract my attention, which all members should access to. Q for question, C for comment. I will now ask the clerk to advise of the members participating today and for all members to confirm their attendance once their name has been announced by the clerk, so that this is clear in the recording of the meeting and can also be recorded by the clerk for the minute.
Thank you, Convener. I will run through who we have in the chambers and I will ask those online to confirm they are present, please. So Councillor Anderson we have in the chambers. Councillor Braun we have in the chambers, thank you. Councillor Cuthbert we have in the chambers. Councillor Drysdale. Councillor Drysdale. I think he's struggling. Okay, I'll come back. Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Good morning, Jess. Yes, present.
Thank you. Councillor Leishman we have in the chambers. Councillor Massey we have in the chambers. Bailey McLaren we have in the chambers. Councillor Reid.
Present. Morning.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart we have in the chambers. Councillor Waters we have in the chambers, and Bailey Williamson is with us in the chambers. Can I come back to Councillor Drysdale? Has he managed to come in? No, I think Councillor Drysdale is having connection issues. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Jess. Going to move. Are there any declarations of interest? If you have a declaration of interest, can you put DI in the chat, please? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. I have a declared interest as I have a non-financial interest in Live Active Leisure. I sit on the board of Live Active Leisure, which will be managing the recreation centre on item 612. Also, of course, I'm a ward member for that ward and have been supporting the recreation centre, so it would be right if I withdraw for that application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. I'm not seeing the chat for some reason. Is there any more? Can somebody tell me if there's any more? Councillor Leishman.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Similar to Councillor Braun, I would like to declare a non-financial interest in item 612 and excuse myself from the chambers for its discussion, as I'm also a board director of Live Active Leisure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. I have a non-financial interest in item 7.4 as I'm on the board of Tayside Contracts.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. Councillor, who was that? Sorry. Bailey Williamson, sorry.
I have a non-financial interest as in item 7.4 as I'm a member of Tayside Contracts Board.
Thank you, Bailey Williamson. Right, we move on to item 3, the minutes of the Planning and Development Management Committee of the 6th of July. Can we ask the committee to agree those minutes?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Can I also ask the committee if they agree to a deputation being heard on item 6.2.1?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Right, item 5. Yeah, I've just been informed Councillor Drysdale is now in the meeting. Thank you. Right, we can move on to an application that was previously considered. It's a section 42 application to remove the condition 14, the bus shelter and information board of planning permission for Angus Road, Scone. Can I advise the committee that this is a deferred application? Deputations are not permitted at this stage of a second consideration in accordance with the council's standing orders. Can I ask Mr. Sean Panton to speak to the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. The first item on the agenda today is a previously considered item which was deferred by this committee. As a reminder, the application is a Section 42 application to remove Condition 14 of Planning Permission 18/01239/FLM, which was for the redevelopment of the former Wheel Inn site in Scone. For the benefit of those who may be unfamiliar, and as a gentle reminder, a Section 42 application is only to amend or delete a condition that has already been applied to a planning permission. A Section 42 application does not amend the previous decision other than the condition under question. In this instance, it is sought to delete Condition 14, which required the developer to provide a bus shelter at an existing bus stop. The developer originally applied for a bus shelter on Angus Road, but the public transport unit considered this was not necessary due to the provision of shelters already on Angus Road. The public transport unit therefore requested that the shelter was located at an existing bus stop on Stormont Road outside the Scone surgery. The developer has assessed this and has advised that due to land ownership constraints, it has not been possible to obtain the land required to provide the shelter. The item was brought to this committee previously, but was deferred to further explore options at the other side of the road from the surgery, still on Stormont Road. From further exploration, it has come to light that the council are not the relevant landowners in this location, and as such, it remains the view of the planning department that the condition is undeliverable and does not meet the conditions tests, hence why we are here today recommending the approval of the application to delete the condition. I will now take the committee through a short presentation as a reminder of the proposals. Next slide, please. This first slide shows the location of the development under question. The site is the former Wheel Inn in Scone, located just off Angus Road on almost the corner with Stormont Road. The redevelopment itself is now nearing completion. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed site plan as granted under the original application. The yellow star on the plan indicates where the proposed bus shelter was to be located. Please note that there is already a bus stop in this location, just not a bus stop shelter. The white area immediately to the south of the yellow star between Stormont Road and the site is the Scone surgery. It is understood that Scone surgery own the land where the bus shelter is to be located, thus being out with the developer's control. The area which was asked to be explored via the deferral of this item was at the other side of the road from the yellow star. From looking at the screen, it appears that the yellow star is not showing. So for the benefit of those that cannot see the yellow star, where it says surgery, there we are. That's it appearing now. Thank you. Next slide, please. This Google Street View image shows the bus stop under question on Stormont Road, denoted by the red arrow. The blue arrow shows the development itself. As seen from this photograph, due to the narrowness of the pavement, the only location for a bus shelter would be within the grounds of Scone Surgery. The developer has indicated it has not been possible to secure this land, hence the current application to remove the condition. You can also make out the existing bus stop at the other side of the road, which was asked to be explored via this deferral. Next slide, please. This slide shows the existing bus shelter provision in the immediate locale. The pink dots show the bus stops which do not have shelters, and the yellow dots indicate those bus stops which have shelters. The applicant has now explored the land ownership of the two closest bus stops in proximity to the site, and neither are within the council or the applicant's control. It is therefore considered that the applicant has explored all suitable options in close proximity to the site, and that the condition now fails to meet the conditions test. Next slide, please. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes the presentation for this application. I will leave members with the proposed site plan again.
Thank you, Mr. Patton. Do members have any questions for officers? Councillor James. I do.
No, sorry, Convener. I was just in the process of saying I don't see the star when you already, so it was an inadvertent send. Sorry.
No problem. Councillor Reid, you've got a question?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I just want to know what the response from the general practice was when they were asked if they would sell the land.
Yeah, I can answer that one for you. Thank you. So the developer did not approach Scone Surgery. The developer felt that because they had to acquire land to do this, they did not want to approach the surgery because they demonstrated to us that it fails to meet the conditions test. So our understanding is the developer did not contact the surgery directly to acquire the land.
Supplementary?
Yes, go ahead.
Is that deemed to be appropriate and satisfactory?
Yes, when conditions are applied, they must meet the conditions test, and if the developer cannot do that because they do not own the land, then it doesn't meet the conditions test. So we are satisfied that they shouldn't have to get a land sale or negotiate a land lease for this because that fails to meet the conditions test. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Just wanted to go back to the question of Angus Road. I had a quick look down there myself, and you mentioned there are bus shelters, which there are, but they're on the southbound Perth direction. But there are two bus stops on the northbound direction, neither of which have any shelters. One I would think probably is too far away. It's in Scone where the shops are. But there is a bus stop about 200 metres up north of the site, and I'm just wondering why that wasn't considered. Or is that too far away as well?
Thank you, Councillor Braun. The applicant did originally submit a scheme for Angus Road that was assessed by the Council's Public Transport Unit, and the Council's Public Transport Unit considered it was not necessary on Angus Road, and they recommended that they explore the options on Stormont Road. So in answer to your question, the applicant has explored Angus Road. They've submitted a scheme for that, but our own Public Transport Unit considered it wasn't necessary. And also, just on the back of that as well, the proximity to the site, there was no bus stops on Angus Road in close proximity to the site, so it was considered unreasonable to make them do ones further up Angus Road. Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert, you've got a question?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'm just curious that the original condition didn't stipulate a specific location. So it didn't say they had to use the land owned by the council, but it was a condition saying they had to build something somewhere. I don't quite understand why the council not owning the land is a problem.
Yes, Councillor Cuthbert, thanks for that. Just to clarify, in order to provide the enhanced bus stop, extra land is required to accommodate it. So it can't be accommodated within the area controlled by the council or any land under the control of the applicant. So the location shown requires additional land to be provided. That's in third party control, and we can't force the applicant to acquire that, if that helps you.
Supplementary?
Yes, go ahead.
In this case, I mean, I understand it for this bus stop. Is that the case in every planning application, that if a condition requires a developer to buy another piece of land to deliver something that has been specified, whether it be a road junction or whatever, that then we can't enforce that condition?
Well, we shouldn't apply conditions that do not have, where the applicant doesn't have control over the land or the council cannot facilitate that through its own land ownership. So we wouldn't normally apply conditions in relation to this situation. The understanding at the point in time of applying this condition is that there wasn't that land constraint. It wasn't appreciated there was. It's subsequently come to light, and as a result the condition cannot be enforced against and is ultra vires. So we are left with the position that we must agree to remove it because the condition should not be there in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any more questions for officers? Bailey Williamson, you've got a question.
Yes, just out of curiosity, actually, how much land are we looking at that's needed to be purchased to construct a bus stop?
Mr. Panton's going to answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Bailey Williamson. Yes, within the report, paragraphs 48 to 53 detail that there was an area approximately 2 metres deep by 5 metres long, which was required to be purchased in order to get the bus stop to meet our council standards of widths of pavements, etc.
Actually, how much of the doctor's surgery land would we have required to have purchased in order to accommodate that?
On the doctor's surgery side of the road, they almost would have had to acquire the full size of the bus stop just due to the width of the pavement.
Thank you. Lachlan, Mr. McLean, you want to come in?
No, Sean's answered the point already, so there's nothing further to add at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. See, there's no more questions. Can I have a motion? Yeah. Sorry, Councillor James, you put forward the motion.
Thanks, convener. Yes, I did. I mean, I think it was Councillor Wilson, Councillor Simpson, when they were here, asked for this to go back for further investigation. The developer's done everything he can. The fact of the matter is, if you don't own the land, you can't build on it. So I'd go with accepting what our officers are asking for and approving the removal of this. So I'd go with the officers. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder? Oh, Councillor Braun.
Yeah, happy to second, convener.
Thank you. I have a comment. Sorry, I do apologise. Are there any amendments to the motion? Nope. Gee whiz. Oh.
Yes, I expect my disappointment in the result of what's proposed in front of us today, especially when the developer has not proceeded with any discussion of Dr. Surgery, which was the obvious ground to be available to put a bus shelter on this kind of garden area there. It's not building or anything else to be demolished, it's just a bit of garden area, the 10 square metres of ground that's possibly purchased. The ground across the road, I say from my previous employer, I'm surprised that if they had been approached, ground it in Scone, on that side of the road especially, where we've sold off ground, Thistle Place, all these areas were Mansfield Schoon Estates at some time. The Bowling Greens, Mansfield Estates, and say up that area, Beachy. I'm sure it would go back to Mansfield Estates, Schoon Estates, sorry, and their history. But I wonder why nobody put their hand up to say we might have it. So I feel the search has not been deep enough yet. So I would say, as it well, the developer is not. If he hasn't talked to surgery doctor's practice, he's remiss. And it was a condition of the application that they would find ground for the shelter. And I think I would move that we should not accept the report and continue the deferment if it is possible, so that they could speak to the doctor's surgery developer and also Schoon Estates for ground.
So you're putting forward an amendment?
Yes,
for
an
refusal.
amendment on that, yeah.
Do we have a seconder for the amendment? Sorry, Mr. Fogg wants to say a word.
Before you move further to establish whether there's a seconder of the motion, I feel one could have some sympathy to Councillor Anderson's position there and his desire to secure the additional the bus shelter, the covered shelter. However, as Sean Panton said at the start of this debate, this situation is expressly provided for in the government's guidance on planning conditions, and what Sean informed the committee is entirely consistent. The text, and I'm just quoting, if land is outside the site, a condition requiring the carrying out of works on that land cannot be imposed by the authority. So given that we now know it's not in the applicant's ownership or control, it would be a direct contradiction to the government advice on lawful planning conditions. So I would have real reservations about our ability to defend any appeal were your amendment to be successful and the applicant was minded to appeal it.
I was going to just ask that. Do you want to withdraw the amendment, or you still want to go ahead? The amendment's withdrawn. Thank you. As there is no other amendment, the application passes then. Thank you. We now move on to the next application. It's a major application. It's application for the erection of a linked building for agricultural research and development, industry engagement and skills development, and the formation of roads, parking area, landscaping, infrastructure and associated works, approval of matters specified by conditions 20/01103/IPM. And I'll ask Mr. Panton to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. As you have already indicated, the next item on the agenda is an approval of matters application at the James Hutton Institute in Inver by Dundee. The site was granted planning permission in principle in November 2020, including alterations to existing and the erection of new buildings. The proposal before us today seeks permission for the erection of two new facilities, the first of which is an international barley hub and the second being an advanced plant growth centre. These buildings will be linked together. The proposals also include the formation of roads, parking areas, landscaping, infrastructure and other associated works. To facilitate this development, a number of buildings will be required to be demolished. It should also be noted that the proposal is part of a Tay Cities Deal project and no objections were received regarding the proposed development. The application is only before you today as it constitutes a major development. I will now move to a presentation which will show the proposals in more detail. This first slide shows the location of the site. You can make out the River Tay to the south, the A90 to the north, and Inver and Dundee to the east. The application site forms part of a wider 94 hectare area of relatively flat agricultural land. Next slide, please. This plan shows the location of the site in further detail. The blue line denotes the land ownership of the James Hutton Institute, and the red line shows the planning application site boundary. The yellow line from the application site to the A90 trunk road to the north denotes a recently approved and constructed access road to serve the proposed expansion of the overall campus. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the proposed site plan. The wing to the north is the Advanced Plant Growth Centre, and the wing to the south is the International Barley Hub, with the link building in the middle, making the buildings have a H-shaped footprint. The area to the south of the building will be a landscaped courtyard area. Next slide, please. This next slide shows a visualization of the International Barley Hub. The design of the building is considered to complement the surrounding James Hutton Institute campus and is not considered to appear out of place. It is also considered a proportionate scale to the site under question. Next slide, please. Again, this slide shows a visualization of the International Barley Hub, viewed from a different angle. Next slide, please. This next visualization now shows the Advanced Plant Growth Centre. To the left of the image, you can just make out the International Barley Hub, which was shown in the last shot. Next slide, please. Again, this visualization is the Advanced Plant Growth Centre, just viewed from another angle. I will now move on to a series of recent photographs of the site. This first photograph shows the newly constructed access to the site to deal with the expansion of the campus. This access is located on the roundabout between Inver and the A90. Next slide, please. Again, this photograph shows the new access road and signage that is now in place. To give context, you can just make out the BP garage in the distance, which is located on the westbound side of the A90. Next slide, please. This photograph shows the other and older site entrance, which connects to Errol Road. This is currently the primary access to the James Hutton Institute campus. Next slide, please. This photograph shows the site under question as part of this application. As seen, the demolition of the existing buildings has already taken place. Next slide, please. This photograph shows the existing building immediately adjacent to the development site. Next slide, please. This final photograph shows the area which will be developed as a landscaped courtyard and is currently used for informal parking. Next slide, please. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the location plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Panton. Are there any questions for officers from members? Councillor Bailey McLaren, you have put forward a motion. All right. Right, sorry, Bailey McLaren. Right, if there are no more questions, I'm happy to approve the paper. Yes. Thank you. Right, now we move on to item 6. Councillor Braun, Councillor Leishman, I believe you're leaving us at this point. Thank you. Item 6 is the erection of a replacement recreation centre with swimming pool, sports hall, gymnasium, fitness suite, dance studio and auxiliary facilities. Installation of a substation, siting of a sprinkler tank, air source heat pump and bin store enclosure, formation of outdoor sports pitch, parking area, landscaping and associated works at Blairgowrie Recreation Centre, Beaches Road, Blairgowrie. And I'm going to ask Mr. Panton again to speak to the report.
Thank you, Convener. As stated, the next application today is for the erection of a replacement recreation centre and facilities in the grounds of Blairgowrie High School. It should be noted that the applicant for this application is Perth and Kinross Council. I will now move on to a short presentation to outline the proposals in further detail. This aerial image shows the location of the site within Blairgowrie. The site is bound by Blairgowrie High School to the north and residential properties to the east, south and west. Next slide, please. This is an existing site plan. The existing recreation centre to be demolished is a building in the northeast corner of the site. The site at present is currently part of the school playing fields, thus being a relatively flat grassed area. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the proposed site plan. As seen, the building is to be relocated from its existing position. This will allow for the development to be carried out in 2 phases, with the existing recreation centre remaining operational during the initial construction of the replacement centre and then demolished once a new building comes into use. The area where the existing centre is located will be made into the site access from Beaches Road with parking and drop-off facilities. To the west of the new building will be new external sports pitches where a synthetic surface and flood lighting will allow it to be utilised all year round and more intensively than the existing grass surfaces. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the proposed elevations of the building. As seen, it is contemporary in nature and has been designed to obtain passive certification to ensure that it has minimal environmental impact. The external materials are predominantly dark grey standing seam cladding with curtain walling and feature metal cladding on the north elevation to emphasise the entrance. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the roof plan of the proposed building and some visualisations. The swimming pool and related changing village, where temperatures are higher, are positioned on the east side of the building with east and south facing glazing to maximise solar gain and to reduce heating demand, whilst distributing natural light through the space to limit demand for lighting energy. I will now move on to a series of photographs showing the site in greater detail. This first photograph shows the existing site access from Beaches Road. The existing centre is seen beyond that access. Next slide, please. This next photograph shows the elevation of Blairgowrie High School, which looks on to the existing grassland. Next slide, please. Again, this photograph shows Blairgowrie High School, this time showing the 4-storey teaching block in closer detail. Next slide, please. This image shows the existing recreation centre, which is sought to be demolished. As seen, the building is now dated and is not suitable for modern day needs. Next slide, please. Apologies for the weather in this photograph, but this image shows the existing grassland where the new complex is to be built. Next slide, please. This final photograph shows some of the adjacent residential properties to the site. Conditional control has been recommended to ensure that the amenity of these properties is not compromised via the proposed development. Next slide, please. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Panton. Do we have any questions for officers? And we also have Mr. Brian Reid here, who's the project manager for ECS. He will answer any questions that any officers cannot. Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Waters, you've got a question.
There we go, a bit of patience. Just a question on during the construction phase, with obviously the construction site being out of bounds to the public and the initial building, is that any impact on the area that would currently be used by school kids and stuff like that? And is there any plans to manage that?
Brian, could you answer that one? Thank you.
Third time lucky. Yes, absolutely. We've been working closely with the school for quite some time now. We've had user reference groups with the school, key stakeholders, LAL, public users, and we're creating a series of access points, temporary parking, access for the contractor, safe access and egress, improved social spaces for the children elsewhere during construction as well, and then thereafter. So yeah, absolutely. We're confident that given the site and the size of the site, that we can accommodate all the external PE we require. The rec centre will remain open throughout the period of the build, so there's no impact on PE at all, and we've got safe actions in place to ensure that children can have social areas during construction and complete separation. It's something we've done obviously in many projects over the last several years, so we're very comfortable with all that.
That's great, thank you very much.
Just in addition to that, sorry, we've also recommended condition 11 for a construction traffic management scheme, just to ensure that the school kids and the likes are all safe from the construction vehicles. So although we have every faith in our colleagues, it's a belt and braces approach.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Councillor James, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, convener. And in part, I think that the last remark answers it in some part. Long time coming, and really pleased to see this before us. However, I've a little concern. Page 63 of our papers, paragraphs 64, 65, 65 in particular, parking. It's always going to be an issue. Beaches Road, there's always an issue with parking there as it stands at the moment. So, you know, looking into the future, I noticed at the bottom of paragraph 65, 16 spaces will be removed and landscaped. So we're actually losing some parking spaces before we put parking spaces back in. Is there really a need to remove those other 16 and therefore, increase from the 33 parking spaces? And the other part of this is of those 33 parking spaces that are being provided, as it says in para 64, 20% of those, that's quite a large proportion, are for accessible spaces, and another 20% are for electric vehicles. So those 33 spaces have already shrunk down to, not a very considerable number. Do we need 20% accessibility? Do we need 20% electric vehicle? And do we need to get rid of the 16 spaces? One last moan, sorry, not a moan. Is there a need for 5 motorbike places? I'm a motorcycle rider. You can, do you really need 5 dedicated motorcycle spots? They can park anywhere. Sorry for moaning, but I think it really does need bringing up. I'd like to see parking reinstated. Sorry, thank you.
Mr. McLean, would you like to answer that one?
Yes, I'll answer that one. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor James. With regard to the level of car parking that's been provided on site, so at the moment we've got 16 car parking spaces, 15 of which are for regular car users and 1 is a disabled bay. What we're going to be doing is replacing them elsewhere within the site. So what we will have is an uplift of 230% on the number of car parking spaces on the site itself. So that will allow us to provide 43 standard car parking spaces, of which 4 will be electric vehicle charging points. We'll also have 4 further disabled bays, but what we will also have is 2 disabled bays that will have EV equipment installed at them. So in terms of the 12 spaces that you made reference to previously, the accumulation of them is now 10 in terms of we'll have 4 EV, 2 disabled EV spaces and then 4 disabled bays. With regard to the dedicated motorcycle spaces, we've popped them to the north of the site so that they are out with the kind of standard car parking bays, so that if there is anyone who's travelling to the site by motorcycle, they won't be occupying a car parking space, and that there's dedicated spaces available for them. We'll also have 16 bike spaces in the bike shelter, which will encourage people to travel actively to the site. It's quite interesting to note that on the surveys that were undertaken on the 25th of August in 2021, during the AM peak hour, we had 9 pedestrian movements and 11 car movements to the site. And we also saw in the PM, we saw 10 car movements into the site, and we saw 18 people travelling by sustainable modes. So I think it's quite important to highlight that the site is very well used by people who are travelling to the site sustainably, and that there are a number of car movements. What the applicant also looked at was car park accumulation levels, and it's important to note that the car park reached a capacity of 93% between 3:30 and 3:45, which is likely to be the pickup time for parents for school children. And out with that time, it was generally about 50% that we saw. Now, I understand that there, with the kind of training pool that's put in place, there may be concerns regarding if there's galas or swimming galas or something like that that would attract a large number of people to the locale, that the car park may not have sufficient capacity. And I think it's an important point to note that generally the centre is going to be operational from 5:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Monday to Friday, and then operational at the weekend. So during those times, it's unlikely that the school car park will be occupied. So if there are additional needs for car parking, it's likely that the existing staff and visitor car parking at Blairgowrie High School could be used for those vehicles.
Thank you. And Mr. Reid, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, really to emphasise the last point with regards to the school parking available. So you're absolutely right. Any galas or so forth would be the weekends and out with normal school times. We've got a car park immediately adjacent to the rec centre, a staff one, which has got 23 spaces. We could have another 40 plus in the bus bays as well, which can be used. And indeed, we then got another school car park the other side with 45 spaces. So similar to the approach at Strathearn campus, another IL establishments that we currently operate, we'll ensure there's appropriate signage and space for overspill parking to divert people to those car parks for the big events. So obviously there's lots of provision on site actually overall for these type of events.
Thank you both. Councillor Anderson, you have a question?
Yeah, just wondering whether it's a planning consideration or not. Just wondering what savings on this new facility vis-a-vis the existing facility has been replaced, and on environmental understanding of what might be involved in this new building to improve its output to the local area, well, the nation's air, whatever else. It's difficult with gas costs is what they are, but you may be putting a biomass unit, I'm not sure yet.
There we go, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think as was mentioned in the report by the officer, we are taking the passive house approach to this. It will only be the second one in the United Kingdom, I think the second in Europe as well, that's taken this approach. So the whole project approach is absolutely embodying the highest energy standards possible. So there's a lot of modelling going on with that. It's always very difficult until it's finalised and opens to look at that, but certainly the energy usage is looking to significantly improve on this project moving forward. But happy to give any other information outside here, Councillor, for energy statistics. Could get modelling information for you and certainly pass some more detailed information from the engineers to you regarding that.
Thank you. Councillor Waters, you've got a second question.
If that's okay, convener. Just a further addition to that on the passive house, looking for that level of certification, and that what's the confidence level that can be achieved? And at the end of the build process, there's a number of tests that get done, and it's based on the result of these tests. Are we confident that level can be achieved?
Yes, we're always confident. Absolutely, we're dependent on our engineers and our project team for achieving that. But it's part of the contract stipulation for achieving those. So it's part of the time taken getting this build to site, as well as because we have to do so much software testing. We've got independent passive house certifiers involved in the project. We've got independent consultants moving forward on it. They're pulling all the information, testing at all times, and during the process there has been areas being redesigned, things like heat gain, all kinds of manners of things being looked at. So we are confident, given the amount of design information we've had to go through and change during the process to meet with the passive house requirements. So that has all been undertaken, and what we have to do is make sure that the modelling is all shown that will be achieved before the contractual close to get to that. So yes, we are confident of that. It is a challenge for the team, but they're absolutely working towards that, and it has been done elsewhere now once, so we're confident of achieving that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see there is no more questions, and can I ask for a motion? I see Bailey Bailey McLaren has put forward the motion, and Councillor Richard Waters has seconded. Do any of the members want to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I would just like to forward this application for approval to start the deliverance of a first-class iconic sports facility within the Blue Gowrie area, which is long waited for by our residents, and I'm happy to move the motion.
Councillor Waters, do you wish to speak to second?
Yeah, I absolutely delighted with this application coming forward, but also from the example it sets, where we're looking at building a major structure, and we're looking at doing it to the highest environmental standards that are available. The design of the building to get solar gain, the passive house standard, and let's not forget, given the cost of living crisis and the cost of energy, the savings for the council on maintaining and heating the building as well. And one thing with passive house as well, because of the ventilation system, you get a high level of oxygen into the building, which I'm sure from a sports perspective should increase performance, right? I don't know if anybody's ever done any examples on that. It'd be interesting to hear, but no, absolutely delighted to second it, and absolutely delighted that this is going forward. Thank you.
Thank you both. Can I ask, do we have an amendment? No amendment? No. Then the paper carries then. Thank you. Thank you. We're rejoined again by Councillor Braun and Councillor Leishman. We move on to local applications now, and item number 6 is the formation of a cemetery, columbarium, car parking and track, landscaping and associated works at which is no wood rate. Which is no wood rate. That's the one. No. Oh, well, which is now? I'm getting corrected. It's which is now. Thank you, Bailey. I'll ask Mr. Paul Williamson to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener. This application follows on from previous applications on the site and seeks to address the previous reasons for refusal. The proposal before us today seeks full planning permission for a cemetery and columbarium for the storage of funeral urns and celebrations, together with associated supporting infrastructure at which is now wood. The overall site area covers some 2.71 hectares and is located within the wider grounds of Fingask Castle near Rate. Next slide, please. The site is accessed via the Inchmichael junction of the A90, which serves both Errol and Rate. From that junction, the site is some 2.25 kilometres by road via the C402 from the A90 and C401 from the Rate junction to the entrance to Fingask Estate. This aerial shot shows the relationship of the site, which sits in a natural bowl, to the wider Castle Estate to the northwest and Rate, which is located to the southwest. Next slide, please. This next plan shows the site in slightly greater detail, with the relationship to the walled garden and potting shed to the west, together with the nearest residential property, Garden Cottage, to the northwest of the main field. The access meanders via an existing track, which is to be upgraded from the estate entrance to the southeast. Next slide, please. This shows the intended layout of the site. As noted within the report, the area of burial plot sits within a natural bowl. The tabled layout, which has a capacity of just over 1,000 layers, takes cognizance of the Scottish Water Mains pipeline, which runs through the site. The burial plots are located predominantly to the north, with some also to the west. The columbarium, which sits in the form of a mounted platform, is located to the southeast corner of the field, adjacent to the 18 car parking spaces provided within the site. Additional parking is also provided at the existing surface car park to the northwest, utilised for the castle. I will now move on to a series of photographs. Next slide, please. This shows the visibility on the C401 westwards, back towards Rate, at the entrance to the Fingask Estate. Next slide, please. This shows the visibility eastwards from the site access with the public road towards Abernight. Next slide, please. This shows the eastern boundary of the field with the retained witches now wood to the left-hand side. The proposed columbarium and car parking would be towards the solitary tree with burial plots in the foreground. Next slide, please. This shows the view westwards towards the walled garden. Next slide, please. Again, from the eastern boundary of the cemetery field, this view is northwards towards Garden Cottage, which is the orange rendered building that you can see, and also illustrates the rise in topography in that direction. Next slide, please. This illustrates the existing hardcore surfaced car park, a short distance to the north of the site. This would mainly be used as overflow parking, as outlined in the report. Next slide, please. This is taken from the garden ground at Garden Cottage. This is looking southeast across the site. Next slide, please. Looking slightly further south, this photo gives a good indication of how the site falls away from the north before rising again at the south to create the natural bowl within a contained landscape setting. Next slide, please. Again, from the garden ground of Garden Cottage, this shows the distant views achievable from the site, but within which the development would be contained and supplemented by additional landscaping. Next slide, please. This is taken in a more southwesterly direction towards Rate. Next slide, please. This photo is a panoramic photo, hence the slight distortion, but it seeks to demonstrate the shape of the site within the existing landscape. Next slide, please. This penultimate photo is taken from the eastern boundary of the walled garden and potting sheds with intervening tree cover. Next slide, please. This final photo is taken from the north of the potting sheds at the east of the walled garden. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, thank you. Thank you, convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We do have deputations on this application. I will now hand over to my vice convener, who will introduce the deputations. Thank you.
Good morning. Are you there, Miss Morgan?
Oh, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, that's super.
I believe that you'd like to make a deputation with the application for the formation of a cemetery.
Yes, I would very much. Thank you.
Are you aware that you have 10 minutes to make your deputation?
Yes, I do.
And I will give you a warning when we get to 9 minutes.
Thank you.
Just let me know when you'd like to proceed.
Okay, I'm happy to start now.
Thank you.
Hello,
Please
everyone. Oh, sorry. Shall I just start?
I beg your pardon. If you'd like to proceed, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak on this matter. My name is Caroline Morgan and I live in the village of Rate and have done for some time. This is a lovely project. I don't deny that. It's the impact that I would like to talk about as a resident and as a community. And a lot of that's to do with health and safety and changing the way of life locally because we would be disturbed by a number of things. I'd like to start with talking about the infrastructure. It is a single road with passing spaces and it's not really suitable for a funeral cortege, and there is no way that you can legislate or any legal ways to actually limit the number of people attending a funeral. As we all know, depending on the person, that could be a large number of people attending. There are 18 car parking spaces at this location. Yes, there's additional parking up at Fingask Pavilion where the weddings are currently held and access is not direct. SatNav takes people into Rate Village. When people are anxious and in a hurry, they don't drive carefully. The road is designed for agricultural vehicles, for locals driving, and it's cycle friendly. And with the change in the council's policy to cut the verges once a year, there has been lately, and I'm not sure if you're aware, a number of accidents between cars and cyclists. One very serious one with a cyclist just in the last few weeks. The other thing that's important to talk about is the Cross Tay Link Road. Now, we've had meetings with representatives from Perth Council about that, and they have explained that their statistics will indicate that there will be an increase in traffic on the Rate Road used as a rat run because SatNav will take cars to the shortest route, and we all know that that's what happens. It will become a rat run, and there will be increased traffic, and the roads currently aren't safe for cyclists and for anyone to walk with. There's no walking space. If anyone wants to attend a funeral here, they have to get off the bus at the bottom of the dual carriageway and walk up that road if they don't have car access. Now, a young local girl was struck and very seriously injured while walking on the road. Because it's so narrow, there just isn't the space and the viewing to be able to safely have increased number of vehicles up and down that road. The other thing is, over 1,000 plots, families and loved ones are naturally going to come back and grieve and visit their resting place. Now, they will naturally gravitate towards the village as somewhere to walk their dog, just stretch their legs. The village infrastructure is not a through road, it's a small village. It's a working village. It's where a number of people commute to work in and out. It's not designed for a high influx of people in the surrounding area. It is a real concern that there's one public toilet in Reet Village, and that is serviced by that's for the local cafe at the Antique Centre. I understand there are no toilet facilities at this location that's been proposed. There is the number of burials, how can that be limited? If you've got 3 weddings a week and you've got a couple or 3 funerals a week, I'm sure you can appreciate that the traffic situation on these local single track roads, it's just not designed for that type of increased activity. These are some of the issues that I am really concerned about, and my friends in the village, and I also sit on the Reet Community Association. We're all concerned about this. It's, as I say, the infrastructure and actually the number of interments per day. How many would that be? How many per week? Is that something that can be considered by those of you around the table today, given that there's sometimes up to 2-3 weddings a week? Yeah, and then of course there will be wedding funeral teas up at Fingask. This will bring people up through the back road into the village. There's not a shortcut through, and people will naturally find a shorter route if they get to know about that and returning, visiting family members also. So the roads, the infrastructure, just the whole layout is not designed safely for this type of project. There's inadequate parking, and if people even think of parking at the side of the road, that would be terrible. Can you imagine trying to get a tractor and trailer or even worse, a combine by? But these are just some of the points that I would like to raise today, and I really am concerned about this would change a whole community's way of living and day-to-day living. Should this go ahead. I think that's everything I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan, for your deputation. Are you willing to take any questions if there are any?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Ms. Morgan? Councillor Braun, 2 questions.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Mrs. Morgan, and thank you for your deputation. 2 questions, really. First of all, a general question. Obviously, you know the area. Are there any other cemeteries nearby, and are they full? Do you know?
There is one small burial plot that's in Reet Village itself, but that's been full for a long time. The nearest cemeteries are Murie down near Errol, and then along to Inshture and Longforgan.
Fine, thank you. And my other question really comes back to the accidents that you mentioned. There were several of them. Are these a result of speed, or is it lack of, you were talking about the verges not being cut, so is it lack of line of sight, or is it just speed, or just the pure volume of traffic trying to get through as we are now?
Yeah, well, it's a combination actually, but the last one where the lady was seriously injured, the person driving didn't know, or didn't see any signage at the Giveway junction, and just ploughed straight through and went into that person, and she ended up in critical care. And as I say, that it is a cycle-friendly route. We get lots of clubs and things cycling in this area, but equally, lots of people locally like to cycle on these roads. And with the increase in e-bikes and encouraging people to get active, it is designated as a cycle-friendly route.
Fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Councillor James, you have a question?
I do, please, Convener. Thank you for your deputation, Mr. Morgan. Very interesting, and rate as you rightly say, is a beautiful village. I'm aware that Rate experiences a lot of traffic because of the antique centre. Do you think that a cemetery will create volumes at the same scale as the antique centre? I mean, I'm hoping there's not going to be an increase in the death rate in Perthshire, obviously, but you know, on a comparison with the antique centre, do you see a bigger volume of traffic?
I do in terms of the actual funeral procession. If you think about the numbers of vehicles and the number of times that will happen over the week, which I don't know how many are proposed per week and per day, that would have a huge impact, much more so than the antique centre. If I was to walk down to the antique centre right now, there would be around about 8 cars maximum there. It's a small antique centre with a little coffee shop, very clearly signposted, and people find it easily and then depart. So don't come really into the heart of the village. With this type of project, you have a rear access that people would naturally gravitate down towards the village. It's what people do when they're at the weddings at Fingask. It's the same area, and that we have increased traffic with the weddings. And when people are in a hurry looking for a location like this, they panic, they don't see the signs, they come in, their sat-nav brings them to the village, and they stop and they ask everybody, how do I get to Fingask? So there is a lot more traffic because of weddings alone. And then when you take into effect funeral processions or burials, that I can't imagine, because no one can say how many people will attend. You know, it could be anything from a few cars up to potentially up to 100 cars. You know, you don't know. There's nothing that stops us from, you know, it's open to everyone to attend. So that is the concern. I don't think it's comparable with the traffic at the antique centre at all. That is minimal in comparison to what this could potentially cause and arise. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor James?
It kind of does, Vice Convener. I'm trying to get from Mrs. Morgan whether, you know, the point I was trying to make is that the antique centre is open 7 days a week and traffic is constant, whereby we're hoping that we're not going to have a continuous flow of traffic to a cemetery. And regardless if there's a cemetery there or not, weddings will still take place. We're not going to stop the weddings, but that's comment. But thank you very much anyway. Yes.
Okay, there are no further questions, Ms. Morgan, so thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. If I could be advised of the outcome, I'd appreciate that, because I've not been able to get access to link online.
Thank you for your comments, and we'll try our best to do that. Bye.
Thank you.
We now have another deputation, which I'll hand back over to the Vice Convener.
Thank you, Convener. We have Mr. Threepland, who is here in person, and we'll give him a chance to set up.
I might be able to help both Councillor James and Mrs. Morgan about the traffic. I did ask, when I thought of this scheme, there is a British Society of Natural Burials, and I first of all asked 1 or 2 members of this society, and then I asked the chair lady called Rosie Imam, and she said there isn't a formal survey, but informally they said the average number of cars for a burial was about 4 or 5. And if it's very unlikely that we would have more than one, but we might possibly have 2 burials a week. So that's 4 or 5 cars in comparison with the antique centre, which has every day 8 cars, or as Miss Morgan says, an average of about 8 cars. So our traffic will be considerably less than the antique centre, and furthermore, the traffic doesn't go through rate. Thank you, convener. Why stay? Yeah, I'll stay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Threepman, for your deputation. Do we have any questions for Mr. Threepman, if you're okay to take them? Councillor Braun.
Thank you for your deputation. A very quick question. It was something Mrs. Morgan brought up and you didn't mention. Obviously, there'll be cars going to funerals, but there will also be probably cars coming in now to visit their lost ones as part of the grieving process. So the more layers, I think you call them here, the more layers you have, the more people will be coming back, if you know what I mean. So you're accumulating more traffic, and you didn't mention about that. She did, but you didn't mention that. If I could ask you.
The answer is I don't really know, but informal discussion with people who run very similar sites is that actually it's rather surprising how seldom people come, and when they do come, they tend to come in the evening. I'm sorry, I can't help you further.
Thank you, Mr. Threepland. There doesn't appear to be any further questions. Thank you for your time. I will hand you back to the convener.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, convener. I have 2 questions, if I may. The first one relates to the soil condition in the area. Has there been any analysis or testing to establish the sufficiency of soil depth and quality of soil that will allow layers to be dug? Are there any concerns in that respect? Is question 1. And an entirely separate question 2, coming back to the issues that we've just been discussing around traffic volumes and access. I don't see any analysis of this by officers as part of the papers that we have before us, and I'm just looking for officers' comments on what we've heard from the deputations around the traffic volumes and not just the unpredictable nature of the number of vehicles that will arrive at a funeral, but also, and perhaps less of a problem, but nevertheless a bit of a problem, would be expected traffic volumes in relation to visiting loved ones after funerals and so on over time, which can happen any day of the week, at any time of the day, day or night, clearly, or day or evening, clearly. So really just if I could ask officers for comments on soil condition and on traffic volumes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who is going to take this? Paul, you said you answer that.
I'm happy to to take that one on, convener, and thank you very much for your questions, Councillor Drysdale. First and foremost, as you'll note from paragraph 2 on page 77 of the committee papers, the application has been supported by a hydrology and hydrogeology report in respect of ground and soil conditions. That in itself has dictated parts of the layout, together with that presence of the Scottish water main, and it's all been set out so as to avoid the parts of the site where there are underlying stone and rock beneath the site. So that has been investigated as part of the proposal. Secondly, in respect of the roads and parking issue and the traffic volumes, I'll certainly let Lachlan McLean kind of follow up on this basis, but as you can imagine, trip rates associated with facilities such as these can be quite difficult to dictate, you know, in comparison to the likes of a supermarket, any other built form of development where you have more regular flows of traffic. But within the design statement and supporting statements provided by the applicant, they have flagged that, you know, it is expected that there would be up to 2 burials per week. Obviously, that's just going to be over 100 in the space of a year. Obviously, they have provided parking within the site, and they do have access to the existing car park to the northwest as well. But I'll perhaps let Lachlan follow up on that, if I may.
Thank you, Paul. With regard to your question regarding traffic volumes going to the site, I mean, there was a supporting statement that was submitted by the applicant in terms of the anticipated volumes or what they would expect or how they would expect people to travel to the site. So what they've said in their statement is they expect people to travel or car share to the site given its remote nature. So whilst we wouldn't expect a large number of single occupants to come to the site, we might expect people to be picked up en route. I think I've been in a similar situation myself where I've attended a funeral and I have been picked up when going to a remote location such as this. So I think whilst we do have concerns, or whilst there may be concerns being brought to light in terms of the expected volumes of cars travelling to the site, the applicant has informed us that informally there would be approximately 4 or 5 cars attending the site for each burial, where there'll be 2 per week. And as we've all seen, there's 18 car parking spaces on site. So if there was to be a burial and visitors on site, there should be capacity there. Notwithstanding this, as Paul's already mentioned, there is additional car parking for about 40 to 50 cars within the site. I also note that the applicant has advised people who are visiting the site to use the main entrance and exit of the site rather than going down into the village itself. Now, I know that that was one of the concerns of Miss Morgan when she spoke about routing of vehicles down through the village of Rate itself, but I think the applicant has tried to address that with signage and direct people back down to the C401 for any people who will be attending the site to access and egress from that point.
Thank you for these answers. If I might just have a quick follow-up on the soil-related one, convener. Never having in my life before seen the word hydrogeology, I've just looked it up, and it seems to relate to how water gets into the ground, how it flows in the subsurface and interacts with soil and rock. And I fully accept that analysis, satisfactory analysis has been done of that aspect. I'm just, what I was actually looking for though was, you know, obviously layers are deep excavations, and I'm asking about the quality of the soil and whether analysis has been done to ensure that, you know, that the soil under the surface is of the quality that can be excavated, and that there's no sort of rubble and you know, stuff well underground that is going to cause problems Just has there been an analysis of that? Thanks.
Lynn, are you going to take that one?
Hello. From what I can see, Contaminated Land did not make any comments in regards to this. As it is a burial site, really, Contaminated Land wouldn't really necessarily look at the soil makeup and any contamination of the soil. That would only generally be if the site was getting built on and there was going to be people residing in any of that. So I don't think it would be appropriate for a burial site.
Thank you. Councillor Braun, you have a question.
Thank you, convener. Just two minor ones. I'm on paragraph 61 of the paper, and it states that there will be a positive economic impact associated with the development. I just wonder if we could expand on what that actually means on a cemetery.
Who's going to take that one? Paul.
Yes, thank you for your question, Councillor Braun. I think it fundamentally cross-refers to the fact that this is obviously diversification of the existing, business at Fingask, and as a result of that, there's obviously, there's a small employment benefit in terms of the management of the facility. Obviously, it's creating for a need that has been demonstrated across Perthshire. I think it's quite widely known that the capacity of existing cemeteries within the area is pressurised in some instances, and this would help to alleviate some of that pressure that has been building up. So that's where the economic kind of benefit comes from that perspective. It's providing a facility which has got a demonstrated need for, obviously, the employment aspects through it as well, cross-linked to the wider operation of the estate.
Thank you. And the second question, I might just give it quickly. It goes back to paragraph 54 now, and it's the concerns over the transport. And we actually say in there that the proposal is therefore contrary to policy 60B. We already admitted it's contrary. I'm just wondering why we're prepared to override that. If we expand on that.
Thanks again, Councillor Braun. From that perspective, obviously, I highlighted within my presentation that there was a previous application on this site which was refused. Among the reasons for refusal at that time, it did highlight the sustainability credentials, both highlighted through TAY plan and their own local development plan. We, in essence, went back to the applicant and asked them to back up the choices in respect of why this site is in particular has been chosen for this type of facility, etc. So a bit of site selection justification. In addition, it was getting that additional information in respect of the likely number of burials to take place, how it would operate from the transportation perspective, as we've already discussed as well. And while there are an element at odds against those sustainability criteria, which would normally divert development to taking place to within existing settlements, the very nature of these green burial sites is that a more attractive and perhaps remote and quiet landscape setting is often desirable. And with the linkages down to the Inchmichael junction on the A90, and with it being equidistant between Perth and Dundee, actually leads it to being, a relatively sensible choice to a degree. So that's where the decision in this instance on balance has come to favouring the proposal in light of all the matters which the applicant has sought to address from the previous refusal on the site.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Bailey McLaren, you have a question?
Yes. I'm just interested in that. I mean, this application represents public's change in views and attitudes towards burials, but within Perth and Kinross, is this a first for application, or do we have anything else that we can, the concerns that have been raised about traffic? and issues within a smaller local community. Do we have other sites within our council area of similarity?
Thank you. Paul, you're going to answer that one. Thank you.
I'm going to answer it, but at the same time, I'm potentially going to hand over to Christian Smith, if I may, given that my experience within Perth and Kinross is more limited, having started in April. So, Christian, if you wouldn't mind taking this one.
Thank you, Paul. You actually just got in before I had put any in there, and I think my answer was going to effectively be there are a number of cemeteries across Perth and Kinross, and not all of them are in accessible locations. There are, as you say, different ways of celebrating the loss of a loved one emerging, and this is one of those that would see provision of a different type of cemetery rather than the standard model of that being provided by the local authority, perhaps within an existing religious establishment or on the edge of town. We had an application recently very close to Pitlochry cemetery, which again, if you know that, is not in the town. You've got to go around the road that takes you up to the theatre and then up a wee hill and into the car park and round. But there are a number of examples of different approaches to burying our loved ones these days, and some of them are rural and provided by individual parties, etc., etc. So I don't have an answer as to is this the first one in Perth and Kinross, but it is quite a common emerging approach to providing facilities of this type, if that helps.
Thank you. Mr. Fogg has indicated he's got to expand on this.
If this Bill McLaren, coincidentally, I was speaking to a member of the council's community green space team just 2 weeks ago, and he made me aware of the acknowledged shortage of cemetery provision across Perth and Kinross. He also explained that historically the approach thus far has been looking to expand existing cemeteries within Perth and Kinross, but that's no longer viable, and therefore there is active proposals being undertaken to look for new cemetery provisions. So we haven't seen much in terms of applications before this committee to date, but it is possible that we'll be seeing more approaches like this and others taken forward by the authority over the next few years.
Thank you. Councillor Leishman, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, convener. Following on from that, do we have an estimated or exact capacity of graves on site, and that being the case of the average of 1 or 2 a week, can we get an indication of the operational lifespan for the site?
Mr. Williamson.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. Certainly from the perspective of plots that are available, it's 1,020. Obviously, the availability of plots is dependent upon the take-up. As indicated by the applicant at this time, they're anticipating 2 burials per week. So at that, you're looking at just over 100 per year, and on that basis you would then be saying an approximate 10-year period until that would be at capacity. But as I say, that's very much dependent upon the take-up of burials at this location. It could be less, it could be more, so that would just be an approximation.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for officers? Give it a minute. No more questions. Can I ask for a motion? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, convener. This is obviously from the photographs we've seen an idyllic site, and a new concept for laying loved ones to rest. I have concerns about traffic. And as we heard, it is very difficult to do an assessment with funerals because of as and when cars are passing. So I feel that we have to rely to a certain extent on local knowledge. There have been accidents in the area. There is traffic that goes to the antique centre. There are weddings ongoing. Funerals will increase or accumulate that traffic. And of course, there may be people obviously visiting the graves of lost ones in due course. I have in mind, therefore, that if I can put it to you, I still feel that policy 60B should apply. And I would also say that it contravenes policy 8A, 8B, and 8G. Perhaps before we go and see if that's competent, we should ask if anybody would actually second my motion.
Do we have a seconder? Is there an amendment?
I propose we move the paper.
Does Councillor Wilson have a seconder?
Williamson.
Bailey Wilson as well. Is there a seconder? Councillor Waters.
Happy to formally second that. Thank you. Okay. That's formally second the amendment.
Thank you.
I'm happy to withdraw since there's no seconder. Thank you.
So it's agreed. The paper is moved. Thank you. Move on to the second local application. And this is a change of use from dwelling house to holiday accommodation unit at Tatha View, 4 Braes of Taymouth, Kenmore, Aberfeldy. And to introduce the report is Mr. Williamson. Thank you.
Thank you again, convener. This next application relates to an existing dwelling house at the south of the Kenmore settlement boundary with a proposal to create a short-term letting unit. Next slide, please. This aerial extract illustrates the position of the site just to the south of Kenmore, close to the junction of the A827, which leads back to Aberfeldy, and the South Shore Road, or C451. The road access is taken from the latter and winds up the hillside before accessing the wider development known as Braes of Taymouth, comprising 8 broadly similar dwellings constructed into the hillside. Next slide, please. This plan shows the existing site layout, which is to be unchanged as a result of the application proposal. It does, however, give an indication as to the relationship to the adjacent properties, which shall also be shown in the subsequent photographs, which I can run through quickly. Next slide, please. This shows the site from a position slightly to the south, with the garage and parking area of number 4 in the foreground, and dwelling located at a slightly lower level with views over the eastern edge of Locale. Next slide, please. This is taken from the terrace garden ground to the eastern side of the property. Next slide, please. This is the view north from within the site, giving glimpses into Kenmore itself. Next slide, please. This is another view of the property from within the garden ground to the east, just from a slightly lower level. Next slide, please. And this photo is taken from slightly further north within the garden, giving a view back up to the existing dwelling and giving an idea of the existing topography. Next slide, please. This next photo is taken from the A827 junction with the South Shore Road and shows the access road leading up on the right-hand side. The pedestrian access gate from the property is just visible to the left of the middle of the photo, amidst the hedge. Next slide, please. This shows the eastern elevation of the property. Next slide, please. This is the north elevation and shows the recently completed extension beyond and the neighbouring property on the right hand side. Next slide, please. This shows the view northwestwards from the property over Locale. Next slide, please. This is the view of the previously approved extension from the west. Next slide, please. This is taken from a similar position to the west, adjacent to the neighbour's boundary. Next slide, please. This shows how the internal shared access drive continues down towards numbers 5 to 7 Braes de Taymouth. Next slide, please. This penultimate photo shows the house and access and Kenmore beyond. Next slide, please. And this last photo returns to show the garage and parking area associated with the property. Next slide, please. Thank you, convener. That now concludes my presentation. I'll leave members with the site location plan for reference, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. Are there any questions for officers? Councillor Braun.
Sorry, back again, convener. It's just a general question for officers. Is it normal for planning permission to be required for a change to renting a property out? I know it might be coming up with a new short-term let scheme that comes into operation, but as we stand now, would you normally have to apply for planning to rent a property out? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe my colleague Mr. Panton will take that because he has been working in relation to the short-term let issue and perhaps can give a far more informed viewpoint than either Paul and I, although that is perhaps being mean to Paul.
Thank you, Christian. So yeah, short-term lets are rapidly evolving and legislation and guidance is changing around them all the time. In Perth and Kinross, all flats being used for short-term lets are required to have planning permission, and each house is considered on its own merits, and that is down to whether it affects the character or amenity of the area. So if we considered that a change of use would impact upon the character or amenity of the area, so in villages such as Kenmore, that is going to have an impact upon the character. So in some instances for houses, planning permission is required, in all instances for flats. We have just recently published new guidance on our website, but like I say, it's rapidly evolving and changing, and we'll try and keep you all up to date where we can.
Could I just, sorry.
Yeah, I'd maybe just add as well that it's fact and degree as well, so it's about percent, well, not percentage, because you can't apply a percentage necessarily, or we haven't applied a percentage, but it's not to say that any use, so if it was used one night every now and again, once a year, that's perhaps not sufficient. So we would have to look at each case, and each case on its merits would be considered. But in this instance, the arrangements that are to be followed, we feel it should require planning permission. I'll maybe also clarify it's not that it would have an impact, well, it may well have an impact on amenity. It's whether that impact is significant enough to afford control by saying no, or whether it's acceptable subject to controls, or just acceptable subject to having planning permission to look at the issues.
Could I just have a supplementary on this, just for clarification? Is this because it's a holiday let, or would you have to have the same procedure if it was being let on a tenancy basis? Is this purely because it's a holiday let?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, correct.
Thank you. Bailey McLaren, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you. My question relates to one of the concerns that have come up through the letters of representation, and that's with regard to noise. Can the officers give any direction as to how that could possibly be addressed, such as any conditions attached to the proposal, if we approve?
Who's going to take that?
Convener, I would say there are noise conditions that could be attached, but I'm conscious Ms Reid is present and this is more part of her professional area of expertise. She might prefer to answer. I can only say that there are, in some circumstances, noise conditions that could be properly imposed, but it might be that Lynn has more comments she wants to add that would be of assistance to you.
Yeah, under the new legislation that's coming in, all short-term lets would need to have a license, and through that license regime, they're looking to hopefully set standards and conditions with regards to noise. Through the planning, we could set a noise management plan in which the applicant would need to set out, you know, what levels of noise that is acceptable, and that in the conditions that he would set for any lets, he could state that, you know, there should be no music outside after a certain time. So all these things could be implemented and put into a noise management plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bailey Williamson, you have a question.
Yes, it's about internal consultation and point 34 about waste collection. I was just wondering if there are commercial waste collection facilities available in Kentmore, or are they able to even get to the house?
Have a taker for that one? Mr. Williamson.
I was just going to add that, and certainly thank you for your question, Bailey Williamson. Certainly from undertaking my site visit here a couple of weeks ago, the arrangements for bin collection seem to be from the kind of, as the plan as you see it on the screen, would be at the bottom left-hand side. So the bin storage area seemed to be located there for accessibility for bin vehicles. I'm not sure if Lynn's got any other knowledge on that, but obviously it would be for the responsibility of the applicant to ensure that adequate facilities are in place. I am not sure whether becoming a short-term let in itself would excuse the property from, you know, just general residential collections or not.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No. Well, I will not ask for a motion because I'll put forward a motion for approval for this paper. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Braun, thank you.
Happy to second, Karina.
Is there any amendments? Oh, Councillor Bailey Williamson, you put an amendment to the motion.
Yes, I would like to propose an amendment to the motion that we accept the application as is, but award a temporary planning application for 2 years.
Do you have a seconder?
Perhaps it might be helpful before a seconder is sought, that Councillor Williamson, the reason why he's proposing a temporary.
Did you catch that, Bailey Williamson?
Yes, I think I did. The rationale behind it is we as Mr. Patton explained, we are in the process of trying to introduce licenses, and I don't think we've got any real grip at the moment of how many houses are available for short-term lets within a given area, and the disproportionate effect it's having on the local population. I feel by awarding a temporary license rather than a full license, we can actually return to this once we have a greater understanding of the range of short-term lets within the given area.
Thank you. Councillor Waters, you're seconding the first amendment.
Happy to formally second Bailey Williamson's amendment.
Thank you. I see Bailey McLaren, you have put in an amendment as well.
Yes, it was, thank you. In relation to the answers to my question, and I would like to put an amendment to approve the application, but to add a recommendation for a noise management plan. Is that, I'm looking at Jeff, is that feasible?
It could be presented as a second amendment, and then it would be voted on against Councillor Bailey Williamson's amendment. However, and whilst it's a matter for the convener, I suppose it's possible that the convener would be willing to amend his motion to approve, but with the imposition of a noise management plan as a condition, which would make for a simpler administrative process that we're voting that amended motion against the amendment of Bailey Williamson. But it's a matter then for the convener whether wishing he'd be willing to amend his motion to accommodate your position. Would you be prepared to amend your motion so that you're approving it, but with the additional condition of a noise management plan that would then be voted against? Sorry? Yes, yes. Right. As well. I'm sensing, convener, that both you be willing to accede to your motion being one that's qualified to incorporate a noise management condition, as is the amendment by Bailey Williamson in the event that it's approved for a temporary period only. It would also be with the further imposition of such a noise management condition. And I'm guessing, Bailey McLaren, that you'd be content with that.
Yes, yes, that would be central.
Convener, for those of us online, we can't hear the conversation.
After some discussion on the legal aspects of it, I'm willing to incorporate both the amendments into the motion. If that's okay with the committee.
I'm happy to second that, convener.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
I've obtained both amendments. There's now no amendments.
I beg your pardon. Yeah, my apologies. I'm the last in the uptake here. I've now clarified that. Sorry. Yes. I think.
Thank you.
I'm redundant here. There is an expectation that noise will be controlled in due course, yes, but we're not quite at that point yet. So it may be that in 2 years' time it will be redundant.
There is a comment from Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, convener. And I don't know really, perhaps I should have asked a question. I'm just very, very conscious, you know, while we're going for a lot of holiday accommodation, it reduces housing stock for longer lets for residents. We're getting that in Locale at the moment. I'm very conscious there's a huge amount of holiday accommodation in Kenmore. But you know, I don't know if there's anything that we can do, or will it take a policy like they did in St Ives in Cornwall, whereby, you know, they were limiting second homes and holiday accommodation. I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just to respond to that, Councillor James, just to make you aware, the council are looking at the implementation of short-term let control areas. There are none of them in place yet, and they will go through the relevant consultation procedure with local communities and members and the likes. But that will be something that could be controlled through a short-term let control area. But like I say, we don't have any at present.
Thanks for that, Lachlan. That's reassuring anyway. Thanks.
Thank you. Sean. Right, thank you, everyone. We now go on to the proposal of application notes as PANs. The first one is extension to a quarry at Balladok and Ross. Are there any member comments on the report? Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not sure what you mean by comment, but I was going to ask for a couple of additional points to be looked at for the application when it comes in. The first thing is the question of the groundwater. The biggest concern when this site was first of all developed was there's a lot of people on private water supplies nearby. So I would like to ensure that there's a proper survey carried out to make sure the groundwater is not going to be affected and that their private supplies are not going to be affected. The second thing is that there was a Section 75 agreement for the last, well, the first phase of this, if you like. I would like some sort of report on all the extant conditions to make sure that they're incorporated into the future plan, if you like. As my understanding is, this is a new development with new conditions perhaps being attached, but there were conditions attached to the previous one. I wouldn't want to see those disappearing.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Councillor Cuthbert. They've been noted. Any more comments on that application? No, so we'll move on to the second one. The second one's a mixed-use development comprising the erection of 3 cafe restaurant units, Class 3, with drive-through facilities, business units, Class 4, electric vehicle charging hub, and the formation of a vehicle access parking area, landscaping and associated works at land 90 metres south of 5 Broxden Avenue, E2, Broxden Avenue, Perth. Any comments on this report? Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I do have 2 or 3 comments actually. Main one, the traffic. Currently, we're seeing traffic stacking up on the junction up to where McDonald's can block access to the park and ride. So really, the road junction, the whole traffic, the quantity of traffic that will be going in and out there. So will the road junctions cope? Surface water, we already have a problem with surface water runoff at the park and ride as well. So it's in the same area, it's not a flat site. So just to ensure there's enough drainage designed into the scheme. Waste management, we have a gull problem, litter problem. within that area without adding any more units are going to create litter where gulls feed off them. So a proper waste management storage area, and both for customers and waste management for the processing of the food. And if I may, my final, the core path that links from, if we could ensure that the core path is linked to the proposed core path that would run from the Bellway housing site, and a core path that would be suitable for all types of users. Cyclists, wheelchair groups, and I think that would all add to the amenity, but yet preempt some issues that may come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Barley McLaren. Any other comments? No. Right, the next one is 7.3. It's the formation of a 32 megawatt solar farm, 16 megawatt battery.
Sorry, Convener, I did put C in the chat box.
Yeah, sorry, do apologise, Councillor James, I never saw it.
No, it's not a problem. I mean, I think it's sort of taken for granted, but I want to make sure that we're definitely looking at it. We all know the problems of Broxden roundabout, and I think it's crucial that we get Transport Scotland involved, because, you know, while I really pleased to see extra businesses coming in, it's going to exacerbate what's already a huge problem, as Barley McLaren's already highlighted. But I think it's very important to liaise with Transport Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, again, I'll go on to the next one. It's a formation of a 32 megawatt solar farm, 16 megawatt battery energy storage system, and associated works at Keithnick Farms Limited, Keithnick, Blairgowrie, Keithnick, Blairgowrie. I'll pass you on to Sean. Sean's got a word of this, say something about this plan.
Thank you, Convener. Usually we don't give a commentary on PANs, but this one I will give a bit of commentary. So this was at the committee before, and they submitted a formal planning application thereafter. However, their formal planning application didn't align with the boundaries of the previous PAN, so we asked for a new PAN to be submitted. We determined that PAN, and the applicant has since asked that it was withdrawn from the agenda today because they no longer wish to proceed on that basis. However, as the PAN was determined by us, we are required to send it to you for comments. So like I say, it's unlikely that this one will come forward because the applicant wished for it to be withdrawn, but because we have determined it, we have to send it here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Are there any comments on that one? No. Okay, then we'll go on to the final PAN, which is a northern lateral extension to Quarry with further excavation work at Calais Quarry, Calais. Do we have?
There's nothing to be determined, so my views you don't actually need to.
No problem. Do we have any comments on that one? Nope. Okay, that concludes the meeting, so thank you for your attendance today. Actually, we've got one more thing, if could everybody stay. Councillor Braun wants to say something. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. It was just to remind members that we still operate the local review bodies. We operate those once a month, obviously at the same sort of time as the planning. It is advantageous if we have representation from all groups on the planning committee. So I would ask members of this committee if you would consider sitting on the LRB. I know in the last session there were a few problems and dispute, but that hopefully is now past. We have we're about to start on the third LRB next week, and Barley McLaren and Councillor James are with me again. Councillor Anderson has sat on one. But it would be, I think, better if we get a full representation across all groups of council members. So if I could ask you all to consider volunteering. It is an interesting insight into planning, particularly for those new members. So if you could consider it for me, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Ron. Well, that now concludes the meeting. Thank you very much.